is the action potential. Action potential is the muscular contraction of muscle in the same time scale, millisecond. Excitation of skeletal muscle is similar to that of the nerve. The membrane potential, resting membrane potential of skeletal muscle is minus 90 millivolt. In case of actions, it is minus 70 millivolt. But in case of muscle, it is minus 90 millivolt. And that is very close to that of the equilibrium potential of chloride ion. It is plus 20 or so. Action potential. And depolarization is followed by repolarization, and the phases are the same. And the spike potential in this case is 2 to 4 milliseconds. Spike potential is 2 to 4 milliseconds. And the conduction velocity over the sarcolemma is 5 meters per second. So it is similar to that of the skeletal muscle, and after depolarization and after hyperpolarization, it is slightly more than that of the nerve. In case of nerve, this spike duration is 1 to 2 milliseconds, but in this case 2 to 4 milliseconds, and conduction velocity at this sarcolemma is 5 meters per second. And the concentration of ions across the membrane is similar to that of the neuron. High sodium concentration outside and low concentration in the intracellular fluid. Potassium concentration is similar to that of the nerve. And sodium ion is responsible for this depolarization, entry of sodium ion to the voltage gated sodium channel, similar to that of the nerve, and exit of potassium ion is responsible for the repolarization. It is same. In case of peripheral nerve, there is a term that is a compound action potential. Compound action potential, you can remember, in case of peripheral nerve, that is the multi-peaked action potential, and it is due to the presence of different types of fibers with different velocities. But so much differences do not occur in skeletal muscle. In spite of that, if you stimulate a muscle with threshold or suprathreshold stimulus, initially there is some increment in the action potential, because there are some differences in the excitability of this nerve, of these muscle fibers, and their distances from the stimulating electrode may vary. For this reason, from the threshold stimulus, there is gradual increase and there is a maximal stimulus when all the muscle fibers are activated. But this multi-peaked action potential is not evident. When you take the recorder at a distance, multi-peaked action potential is not, because there is differences are not so much as in the peripheral nerve. In the peripheral nerve, mixed nerve, they contain different types of fibers, different dimensions, different conduction velocities, and so you can get the multi-peaked action potential. That is called compound action potential. In spite of that, in any stimulating experiment, there is some grading. If you increase the stimulus, there is an increase in the amplitude of the contraction or action potential. If you take the electrical event, action potential. In case of skeletal muscle also. It is not the violation of the all or not character, but due to gradual recruitment of muscle fibers in this case. Now, if you consider the case it may be isotonic or isometric contraction, and it is the action potential. And after the 2 milliseconds or so, then there is the beginning of the contraction. And absolute period is 1 to 3 milliseconds. Absolute period. In that case, in case of action potential of the neurons, you can remember that in that case there is a absolute refractory period from the beginning, from the firing point to roughly 1/3 of this, and then the relative refractory period, refractoriness. So, if you consider this spike potential is this refractory period. In case of skeletal muscle, it is the electrical activity that is refractory, but this contraction has no relation with the refractoriness, has no relation. And so that if a stimulus comes after this expiry of this refractory period, if one impulse falls, a second impulse falls in this position, then it may be refractory. But it falls in this position, then if it is the action, there is another action potential, and in response to this, there is another contraction. So there is superimposition of these curves in this there. Consider, if you imagine, then there is this due to second stimulus, action potential, more calcium will be available, and so there will be increase in the contraction, and it is called a summation of contraction. Summation of contraction or tetanus. Suppose it is due to the first stimulus, S1. Suppose it is in this position is the second stimulus, and so in that case, then there is another contraction. Double peaked curve you can find contraction, and it is called a summation of contraction or a tetanus. It may be complete tetanus or it can be incomplete tetanus. Complete or incomplete. Complete or incomplete tetanus. Suppose if this repeated stimulus is arriving during this relaxation phase, it is the contraction phase and it is the relaxation phase, contraction phase and the relaxation phase. So, repeated stimulation is coming in the relaxation phase repeatedly. Then you can get partial relaxations. It may be recording may be isotonic, or in a text you will find isometric type of recording. There is increase in the force, and in that case, if you go on, then initially, then there is, and then you get this type of contraction. if the frequency of stimulation increases, and when it is like this, S1 and S2 falling in the relaxation phase. So in that case, there is some partial relaxation in between the stimulus, and when the frequency increases, that is falling within this period, S3, contraction phase, and in that case there is a steady pull. So these are the conditions of incomplete tetanus, and it is the complete tetanus. In isometric preparation, and there is a dots there, this timing spaces are equal intervals. In intervals, you will find this type of figure in your text. So it is incomplete tetanus and it is the complete tetanus. Complete tetanus. And whenever there is complete tetanus, then there is increased involvement of this, that is the cross bridges. So this tension do increases up to 4 times than that of the single contraction or single muscle twitch. So it is 4 times. In comparison to this is 4 times. 4 times. More force is generated. Clear? Tetanus. Complete tetanus or incomplete tetanus. And whenever we are using our muscles, there is almost always there is generation of tetanus. Twitch contraction is a relatively experimental finding. It is going, but normally there is recruitment of more and more motor neurons, and at the same time there is generation of tetanus. That is called summation of contractions. It is different from tetany. Whenever there is contraction, increased exacerbated muscle due to lowering of the calcium ion concentration. Whenever there is fall in the level of the parathormone, that is called tetany. Excessive of the muscle. Different from this. It is the tetanus is the summation of contraction, and tetany is the increased excitability of skeletal muscle due to fall in the ionic calcium. And it happens whenever there is fall in the parathormone concentration after parathyroidectomy. Clear? This is different. And it is called summation of contraction or tetanus. And it will depend upon that of the twitch duration. And you see in this case, if a muscle twitch duration do differ. In some cases it is short, in some cases it is long. Fast muscles, suppose it is these slow muscles, there is the twitch duration do differ. In fast muscle it may be 7.5 millisecond or so, and there is the slow muscles, it may be much more than that, 100 millisecond or more than that. So it will depend upon the twitch duration. Muscle twitch is demonstrated in the laboratory, in the amphibian preparation. And it will be discussed by me in the practical class. Due to some disruption of hematology class, amphibian practicals is being dealt with. Yesterday I have to start this initial part, and then 2 classes are required for a batch. And in that case, in isotonic preparations there is the curves and it is compulsory. 5 numbers is allotted. Not the numbers, but the neuromuscular physiology of nerve and muscle is demonstrated, it was demonstrated earlier. Simple muscle curve or so in this. In case of amphibian simple muscle curve, you will find this type of figure. Simple muscle curve. And suppose this is duration, it is A is the point of stimulation, B is the point of contraction, C is the end of contraction or beginning of relaxation, D is the end of relaxation, simple muscle curve by single induction shock or due to a single action potential. It may be maximal or submaximal, whatever it may be. Now, if it is considered this from this part to this part is 0.1 second, 0.1 second. So, if you have another stimulus at this point, and in that case you will get a bigger curve. Suppose from this point is another stimulus, and in that case the curve is bigger. So, what should be the duration? At least that is 1 by 0.1, that is the 10 per second. When it is less than 10 per second, you can get the isolated simple muscle curves in isotonic preparations. Clear? Yes, and when it is more than 10%, then there is every chance of overlapping or summation of contraction. Now, when it is just outside the first curve, that is when the frequency is less than 10, and in the case another curve, but it is bigger than this curve, and it is called beneficial effect. In amphibian preparations or discussions, they are called beneficial effect, and in the text it is called TREPPI, TREPP, TREPPI. TREPPI means staircase. TREPPI and it is the beneficial effect. Or TREPPI, staircase phenomenon or TREPPI, TRE. It is not summation of contraction. Summation of contraction when another second contraction falling upon or superimposed on the first contraction, third on the second, fourth on the third, and in that case it is the tetanus that is there. It may be incomplete or it may be complete. In this case, it is not the summation, and it is the beneficial effect of the first contraction over the second contraction. It is called TREPPI or staircase phenomenon, but in the amphibian laboratory and text is called beneficial effect. It is due to increasing availability of calcium ion. If the second stimulus is coming just after the end of the contraction of the previous stimulus, and this time is relatively short, and within the short time all the calcium that has come out from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it is not mopped up by the longitudinal tubules in the short time, some remains, And then due to second stimulus, calcium ion is again liberated. Calcium is coming within the cytosol from which site? এইদিকে রোদিকে একজন কেউ বলো, কোন জায়গা থেকে ক্যালসিয়ামের আসছে সাইটোসলে ইন রেসপন্স টু স্টিমুলেশন? হ্যাঁ, সার্কুলেটরি রেটিকুলামের কোন পার্ট থেকে? কোন পার্ট থেকে? কোন পার্ট থেকে আসছে? সার্কোপ্লাজমিক রেটিকুলামের কোন অংশ থেকে আসছে? কারণ এটা আমরা আলোচনা করেছি, কিন্তু সহজ জিনিস এগুলো, এর মধ্যে কিছু কঠিন কিছুই নেই। হ্যাঁ, কোথা থেকে আসছে? যে বই যেমন ছবি দেওয়া থাকে না, এরকম ছবি দেওয়া থাকে, এরকম ছবি দেওয়া থাকে। এরকম ছবি দেওয়া থাকে না। এটা হচ্ছে সার্কোলেমা, এটাকে বলছে টি টিবিউল, আর এর দুপাশে ডাইলেটেশন যেটা আছে, ইট ইজ কল্ড টার্মিনাল সিস্টার্ন। এখানে ক্যালসিয়াম আয়ন মজুদ থাকে, and it is the longitudinal part, and action potential is spreading through this, and by the interaction of this action potential, calcium ion will come from this. There is the interaction between dihydropyridine receptor in these tubules, T tubules, and with the ryanodine receptor of the terminal system. Calcium ion poured in. During resting condition, the calcium ion concentration is very low, less than 10 to the power 7 mole per liter. But when it increases up to 10 to the power -5 or more, then there is contraction. Whenever there is a single action potential, then when the calcium ion is coming out, it is again mopped up by this actively. So after the single action potential, if there is no electrical activity, then there is no contraction, there is relaxation, and that is evident by the muscle twitch, or in the amphibian preparation it is called a simple muscle car, mechanical response. It is the mechanical response, it is not the electrical, it is the mechanical response, but it reflects the electrical phenomenon. So whenever the first stimulus, within a short time, if there is second stimulus, then all the calcium ion cannot be taken back within the short time. If there is second stimulus, further calcium ion will be liberated. So more calcium is available, there is more activation of the contractile mechanisms, more cross bridge formation, more force will be generated, and it will occur for several number of times. In isometric preparation, you will find in your text that it is the force generated due to first stimulus, and then it is second stimulus, third stimulus, fourth stimulus, and then ultimately it will level up. First, second, third, fourth, and gradually that is increase in this way. Isometric preparation, that is the force or tension that is produced. So it is like the staircase, it is called trapeze. Or same thing, it is in the beneficial effect in isotonic contraction, as is done in the amphibian laboratories. এটা তোমাদের একসময় আমাদের সিলেবাসে ছিল, এবং ক্লাসে সেটা অ্যাম্ফিবিয়ান প্রিপারেশনে সেটা করে সবাই দেখার সুযোগ ছিল। তাহলে পরে এটা বোঝা গেল ট্রেপি। নাও দেয়ার আর সাম আদার পার্টস অফ দিস system: isotonic contraction, isometric contraction, isotonic and isometric. isometric contraction. It is asked in the examination. What is, do you understand by the isotonic contraction? And what is isometric contraction? Load. Suppose this is the muscle and it is the squeeze and a load stretching from a support to the ground, and it is stretched in this condition, and its length, this length is the effective length of the muscle. And if the load is sufficient, so in that case, when it is stimulated, or you consider the load has been increased to some extent, and in that case there is contraction of the muscle, there is the wide increases, contraction of the muscle, and there is the stretching of this elastic element, but the isometric preparation, isometric condition. But if now you condition that after this it will generate strength so that it is above this level, it is above this. This load is such that there is increase in the stretching, but its load remains same. And if further it goes on contracting, then it will be higher and higher, but the load remains same. It is the isotonic contraction. Suppose, to very simple, if we place the hand in this way, it is the forearm and it is the arm. The weight of the forearm is constant, and I am moving this. There is change in the length of the muscle, but the load remains the same. Or the weight remains the same. Weight of the forearm remains the same. It is isotonic contraction. If I give pressure, it is the muscle is contracting at the molecular level. There is this movement of this. There is movement of these contractile elements, but there is no effective shortening of the muscle. Force is generated, but this no change in the length of the muscle. It is called isometric preparation. So during this isotonic contraction, and then there is some work, because there is displacement of this load with the weight of the muscle. There is work done. During isometric contraction, there is no work, there is no shortening of the muscle, and there is no change in the distance is zero. Work is force multiplied by the distance, and it is zero. Then there is no work done. But if the load is such that in spite of my effort it goes down, then also work is done, but it is negative work. বোঝা গেল? যেমন আমার এই অবস্থা আছে, আমার যদি এখানে যদি 5 কেজি অবধি আমি ধরে রাখতে পারছি, যেই 6 কেজি হলো তখন দেখা যাচ্ছে আমার নিচের দিকে চলে যাচ্ছে, then work is done, but in the negative sense. Muscle is contracting, but the point of application of force is opposite to the displacement, that of the displacement. So negative work is done. Yeah. And these terms are frequently used, and this type of isometric contraction is also applicable in cardiovascular system. cardiovascular system. And this figure explains this, that whenever the load to some extent increase, but it is stretching this series elastic element. Then it is up to this, it is isometric contraction. But when its strength increases, so that it is lifted, and whenever it goes on these activities, the load remains constant, and it is called isotonic contraction with the approximation of the end of the muscles, and it is called isotonic contraction. Clear? Now, length tension relationship and the concept of resting length. So, from the rigid support, the muscle is suspended in this way, and there is a force that can measure, and over a recorder, force transduced, and it can measure this force that is generated, force that can be generated, recorder. And the ends of these muscles, that can be changed. Length can be changed. Length can be changed. Length can be changed. Length of the can be changed, and the muscle can be stimulated. By electrical source, it can be stimulated. And in response to this stimulation or not, then there is this, with the change in the length, there is rise in the tension. Due to elastic element, viscous element, tension increases. বুঝা গেল? যেমন রবারকে তুমি যখন টানছো, সে তোমার এগেনস্ট রেজিস্ট্যান্স দিচ্ছে, যত দূরে টানবে সে তত বেশি রেজিস্ট্যান্স দেবে। এটা হচ্ছে প্যাসিভ টেনশন, কারণ তার অ্যাক্টিভ করার কিছু করার ক্ষমতা নেই, প্যাসিভ টেনশন। কিন্তু লিভিং মাসেল ক্যান কন্ট্রাক্ট and it can put additional tension. And if you take a whole muscle, or theoretically if you consider single fiber, all the same, because it is only the summated activity. So a big muscle, a canine muscle, or in human beings, it can be tested, and a graph is given in all tests in this. It is the tension in kg of in this ordinate, and in the absolute change in length. Suppose when it is increased in length to some extent, from this point, without any stimulation, there is increase in the tension. Increase in the tension. And at each length, it is then stimulated. And you get this type of curve. So it is the passive tension. Without stimulation. Only the length is changed, and in response to this, muscle is an elastic tissue. It will exert some tension like rubber band. Yeah. And so it is the passive tension, and at any length it is stimulated, and it is the total tension. It is the total tension that is produced. And in between, there is the active tension. Suppose you consider in that case this distance, you subtract this distance from this, and in this case it is this point. If another case, if you take at the same level, same distance. And if you draw figure like this, then you get the active tension, active tension, active tension. This is the total tension minus passive tension, passive tension, passive tension. Active tension that is generated by the contractile mechanism, contractile mechanism. From this it is apparent that there is a peak value of the, and it corresponds to a particular length, and so it is the resting length. It is the type of adjustment, preparation. It is a skeletal muscle, and it is the stimulators for its contraction. And in that case, it is the isometric preparation, and there is the force transducer, and over a recorder, it is recorded. At every length, there is the measurement of the passive tension. From this, up to this point, it is 0, and from this, when the length increases, change in length, when the length increases, then passive tension develops. And at each length, it is then stimulated, and the total tension is recorded at every length. Clear? And it is the total tension. And if you subtract this passive tension from the total tension at any length, then you get this active tension that is generated. Active tension that is generated. Clear? And it is the active tension. And you see at that point, there is a point at which there is the generation of maximum tension per contraction. And these are also the concept of single muscle twitch, single action potential. And at that point, you see there is the maximum tension that is generated. And it corresponds to a particular length, and it is the resting length of this muscle. And when the length is increased, then there is a decrease in the active tension. And when it is possible, that is when it meets with this, then there is this active tension is 0 at this level, active tension. So total tension curve will be this. There is no active tension at this position. But up to this figure is given in the text, total tension. And minus this passive tension is the active tension, resting length. And what is the reason of the active length? In isometric preparation or whatever may be this force generated muscle is the pulling machine. Number of this actin myosin cross bridges. Power stroke generated at the actin myosin cross bridges. So number of cross bridges at any instant indicate what should be the strength of this. What should be the strength of this muscle at that point. Now we see that it is 2 to 2.2 μm is the sarcomere length. Whenever there is some optimum position, when the number of cross bridges is sarcomere position. Suppose it is a sarcomere and thick filament, and from which that is the, and it is the thin filament. Remember. And that is the formation of the cross bridges. So number of cross bridges at that position, resting length is optimum. That is the most number of cross bridges they are produced. They are not 2-dimensional structure. They are like 3-dimensional structures, like the stem of a tree. There is these branches coming out at regular distances, intervals. And in this way, there are hundreds of these cross bridges are do form. And when it is the optimum position, suppose it is circular length is 0.2. When it is stressed, the number of cross bridges will be reduced. When it is stressed, number of cross bridges will be reduced. And when it is shorter, and in that case, there is less space for this interdigitation. So the result is the same. That is in the optimum position, when the number of cross bridges is maximum, and then there is generation of maximum force. And when it is stressed, then the cross bridges number due to single action potential is less available. So their force is less. Active tension is less. When it is shorter than that, and then it is also this. So when it is shorter than this, then active tension is less. And when it is more than this position, then it is also less. And it will depend upon the number of these cross bridges. And the resting length comes from this observation that majority of the muscle at the resting condition maintain this length. Nature is always wiser than this. There is the elements that is created by nature. And so it is the optimum length, and in the resting condition, good number of muscles maintain this length. So that in response to there is the stimulus, more force can be generated. Clear? The same phenomenon is observed in heart also. The heart muscle fibers, they are connected to one another, and their length increases, and it is better explained by the end diastolic volume, and its effects by the pressure generated or the stroke volume. And it is in experiments, it has been done in this way. End systolic contraction and end diastolic volume or end diastolic pressure and end systolic pressure. And you will, in experimental animals, the similar type of curve is found. In your text, you will find this type of curve in that case. Pressure, and it is the volume, there is the volume, end diastolic volume. And end systolic pressure. And in that case is also seen. Or in some text is stroke volume, between the end diastolic volume and the stroke volume. End diastolic volume into stroke volume. Whenever there is the end diastolic volume, there is increase in the stroke volume. And it is the Frank-Starling's law of the heart. It is a heterometric regulation. But in a particular end diastolic volume, by means of sympathetic stimulation or by pharmacological means, you can increase the strength, force of contraction. There is the homometric regulation. বোঝা গেছে? এটা পরীক্ষায় এটা দেওয়া হয়েছিল, কিন্তু অনেকেই এটা লেখেনি, বুঝতে পারছো? তাহলে সেখানেও একটা পাবে যে এরকম পয়েন্টে সেখানে তার ম্যাক্সিমামই হচ্ছে। নর্মালি ইট of this value, but in the dilated heart, in the failing heart, it is possible to get this descending value, but normally it will not exceed this value. End systolic pressure that is produced. So the same phenomenon. And this descending limb in case of heart is due to disruption of the muscle fibers. It cannot be stressed in this way, more than that. So whenever it is descending, then there is some in skeletal muscle there is good space for separation, but their muscles are connected to each other, and it indicates there is the disruption of the muscle fibers, not the separation of the actin and myosin filament as it can be demonstrated in skeletal muscle in this way. So it is the length tension relationship. Another property in skeletal muscle is the velocity of contraction. Velocity of contraction. Whenever there is some load, then there is velocity decreases. Suppose I am moving this, and then if there is some impediment, then the velocity decreases. So it will depend upon the load, and the load may be that such a way that there is no active, there is isometric tension that is at that point or beyond that. So that length tension, velocity, some text they give some curve in this way. It is the velocity and it is the load. So when the load is 0, velocity is maximum, Vmax. And at this slight load, there is no velocity. So it is the isometric condition in that condition. And at that intermediate point, there is velocity, but it is less than that of the Vmax. And at a particular load, this velocity is maximum when it is at the resting length. When it is at the resting length, velocity is maximum at a particular load. It is maximum. At that load, it is this. Then this velocity increases. Particular load. It is at any length. With resting length, you can consider that it will. There will be more velocity in that case that is generated in the resting length. Yeah. It is the velocity of contraction. Velocity of contraction. This type of curve is given in some books. They ignored it, but in some text this type of curve is given, and there are more explanation. সমস্ত কিছু আমার পক্ষে স্মরণে রাখা সম্ভব নয়, বুঝতে পেরেছো? হ্যাঁ, তোমরা এগুলো ভিন্ন ভিন্ন টেক্সট বই থেকে দেখে নেবে। বেসিক জিনিসটা এখানে আলোচনা করা হবে, এবং এটা আশা করা যায় যে আমার থেকে বুদ্ধিমান যারা লোক সবাই আমার থেকে বুদ্ধিমান, কাজে তারা সেটা পড়ে তাদের জ্ঞানটাকে আরও বৃদ্ধি করবে। এটা একটা বেজাল লেভেলের একটা আলোচনা আমরা করে থাকি, বুঝতে পারছো? কাজেই এখানে তোমাদের উপরে এটা নির্ভর করছে যে তোমাদের উন্নততর মস্তিষ্ক তোমরা প্রয়োগ করে আরও বেশি জানতে পারবে। আগ্রহের উপর নির্ভর করে। ব্রেনের ওয়েট তো সবারই সমান আছে, তাহলে পড়াশোনায় ভালো মন্দ কিসের এগুলো কী হয়? এগুলো সমস্ত আর্টিফিশিয়াল, বুঝতে পারছো? কাজেই সেক্ষেত্রে আগ্রহের উপর নির্ভর করে। ভালো ছাত্র অমুক ছাত্র এগুলো সমস্ত মূর্খ লোকদের এই কথা, কিন্তু ফিজিওলজি সেটা, অ্যানাটমি ফিজিওলজি সেটা বলে না। প্রত্যেকের মস্তিষ্কের ওজন সমান, দেহের ওয়েট অনুযায়ী সেটা ঠিকই আছে, সেটা প্রয়োগের উপরে নির্ভর করে। নাও দি ফাইবার্স অফ দি মাসেল আর নট সেম। Fibers of the muscle are not same, and in a single muscle there are different types of fibers, heterogeneous tissue in that sense. Apparently they are equal, but their features are to some extent different. There are grossly type 1 and type 2 fibers. Type 2 can be divided into type 2A and 2B. From the twitch duration, when this twitch duration is more, in some cases, they are the slow muscles. And where the twitch duration is less, then they are fast muscles. And their color also different. Fast muscles are largely type 2 fibers. They contain type 2 fibers. And the slow muscles, type 1 fibers. Type 1 and type 2 fibers. and 2A and 2B. 2A, that is to some extent, it is fast, and it is relatively, it is the fatigue resistance. And 2B is it is a fast muscle, but it is fatigue, it can be fatigued easily. So, simplified scheme given in older texts, type 1, type 2, and their other names are slow, oxidative and red, fast, glycolytic and white muscle. Mainly type 2B, and it is simplified. You will find your text more complicated, advanced. But the gross things we can discuss. Now, there is other names, this is slow oxidative red, fast glycolytic white, and they are myosin ATPase activity. Myosin ATPase activity. Myosin ATPase activity. And in that case, it is fast and it is moderate. Or high, better it is high. Quick contraction possible, myosin ATPase. Calcium reactivate, calcium reuptake mechanism. It is moderate and it is high. Because quick contraction may be followed by another contraction, and in that case the mopping power of calcium from the cytosol must be high. Calcium reuptake, that is calcium is returning to longitudinal part of the circulating reticulum, and it is more in this case. Diameter, it is small, glycolytic activity, it is relatively less and it is high. Glycolysis for generation of energy, but very fastly. So, glycolysis activity is high. From glycogen, storage of glycogen is more, and glycogen can be converted into lactate, and quick energy can be given. And oxidative activity, it is high. Oxidative activity is characterized by increase in capillarity. That is, blood flow is relatively more in this case. There is increased number of mitochondria in that cells, and also myoglobin that is present in the cells. Myoglobin and increased capillarity is responsible for the red color. And from this property, it is slow oxidative red, and it is frequently used unit. So, it is less fatigable, continuous contraction when there is a large limb muscles and this erectospinae group of muscles, and they are of this type, and they are there are differences in between these. They are all spectrum, but on average, small diameter fibers coming from smaller cells of the anterior horn, they are coming, and they are supplying the muscle cells of type 1 variety. Yeah. And in this case, first type 2 muscles, there are the fibers are large, coming from relatively larger neurons, and then their motor unit, the number of cells may be low or maybe in some cases very high, and their diameter are large, and they can generate in some cases fine rapid precise movement. That is the hand muscles, eye muscles, these are white muscles. But in some cases, some muscles and most of the muscles are not pure enough, but they are mixed type of. And in that case, they can generate very high amount of force for a quick time, for a less time, quickly they can generate mass force. And they are not commonly put into action. Suppose when we are walking, then they do not come in the action. But if you walk fast, or if you are running, then this type 2 fibers coming into action. Initially type 2A and ultimately type 2B. Whenever much force is generated, when an individual is taking a penalty shot, ultimately the shot depends upon the activity of the type 2B fibers. So they can very quickly can generate a force. That is not possible with that of the type 1 fibers. But they are a spectrum, and in different muscles they have different activity. In the back muscles, erectospinal group of muscles, the number of muscle cells, type 1 fibers may be high. And normally this motor, in case of motor neuron muscles, they are not isolated, but they are in the checkerboard pattern, they are produced. They are intermingled between them normally in muscle. Yeah. The motor unit and that remaining part we can discuss the other day. I should not waste time for the next class.
Healthiness, maintenance of the health of the joints, mainly knee joints. Weight reduction, some physical exercise are very important to maintain the stability of the knee joint. Knee joint is the largest and most complex joint in our body. And it is a very weight-bearing joint. More or less whole of the body weight is divided and going to the earth by means of through the knee joint, in front of the knee joint. So it is a weight-bearing joint. Femur and tibia bears the weight of our body. So there is every chance of damage to the knee joint, and it is a highly complex joint. So we have to read knee joint, both for examination purpose of view and as well as for our future practice view. I have already told you, any joint will be read in the following headings: name of the joint, type of joint, subtype of joint, articulating surfaces, next the ligaments, then the ligaments, then the movements, muscles producing the movements, relations, nerve supply, blood supply, and then the clinical anatomy. So these are the headings of dealing in any joint, and knee joint is there. Knee joint is a peculiar joint. It is a synovial type of joint. Subtype is modified hinge. Modified hinge. It is also a condyloid joint. It is also a saddle joint. But functionally as a whole, knee joint is a modified hinge joint. Number 3, it is a compound joint. Number 4, it is a complex joint. Now to explain one after another. Why it is a compound joint? Any joint will be called compound if more than two articulating surfaces, two bones or articulating surface form a joint. Here the knee joint is formed by more than two bones, femur, tibia and patella. Femur, tibia and patella. So it is a compound joint. Simple joint, only two articulating surfaces form any joint we call simple joint. Interphalangeal joint, metacarpophalangeal joint. Any joint with only two bones, sternoclavicular joint, these are known as the simple joint. But if there are more than two bones comes to form a joint, we call compound joint. So knee joint is a compound joint. It is a complex joint. Why it is a complex joint? When any joint cavity, in synovial joint there is a cavity which is filled with a synovial fluid, and this synovial fluid is secreted by the covering the inside of the capsule known as the synovial membrane. If the joint cavity is divided by a partition, either a meniscus or a disc, interjoint disc, we call it is a complex joint. As the knee joint compartment is divided by meniscus, there are two fibrocartilaginous plates are found inside the knee joint. So, which divides incompletely the joint cavity into a upper compartment and a lower compartment. Why it is incompletely? Because there is a communication from the upper part and the lower part. So, incompletely divide the joint into two compartments. So, as the joint cavity there is a meniscus, we call it complex joint. Any joint, temporomandibular joint, there is a disc, so it is a complex joint. So, knee joint is compound joint, it is a complex joint. Whenever any joint, meniscus or a disc is present, intra-articular disc is present, we call it complex joint. Meniscus divide the joint partially, incompletely, as there is a communication between this, suppose it is a meniscus, it is upper compartment, it is a lower compartment, there is a communication between the upper and lower. So it is incompletely divides. So, and when any disc divides the joint incompletely, not completely, we call meniscus. If it is completely divide the joint into two compartments, there is no communication, no connection between the upper and the lower compartment, we call interarticular disc. So it is the difference between interarticular disc and the meniscus. So it is why it is a modified hinge joint? Hinge joint is, look, the door. Hinge means, or this, only one axis and two movements, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. If it is a true hinge joint, there is a one axis, imaginary axis, and two movements. As here, door is open, this and this, this and this. So we call it a hinge joint. Best example is the interphalangeal joint. Only this. You cannot move except flexion, extension, you cannot move any other direction. But in knee joint, it is a hinge. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. But there is we can rotate, slight degree of rotation is present. As slight degree of rotation is present, so we call it is a modified hinge. Number two, in true hinge variety, the axis is fixed. Look, the door, the axis, যেখানে কবজাগুলি লেগিয়েছে, this is the axis, this is fixed. ওটা নড়ছে না, movement যখন হচ্ছে, it is fixed. But here in the knee joint, axis moves. Imaginary. Axis also moves during flexion. Axis in flexion, this one, look, and when it is extended, axis is moving in this direction. So axis is not fixed. For these two reasons, D joint is regarded as a modified hinge joint. Type synovial, subtype modified hinge, complex compound. Then bones forming the joint. To some recapitulation of the idea, especially this is the vastus medialis, vastus lateralis and vastus intermedius, এবং তার উপরে হচ্ছে rectus femoris. This is the rectus femoris. We cannot see the vastus intermedius because it lies deep to this. So these four muscles, very important. Look, this is the rectus femoris. এটা জানতে হবে, ভালো করে লক্ষ্য করো. This sartorius has got no relation except in coming into relation, otherwise no way related to the knee joint. This is the rectus femoris. This is the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and inside there will be a vastus intermedius. These four muscles we call quadriceps femoris. These quadriceps femoris become, in lower part become tendinous. দেখো মাসল বেলিগুলি আস্তে আস্তে কমে যাচ্ছে and become tendinous. And ultimately these quadriceps femoris are inserted into the patella. এটা খুব ভালো করে দেখো. This vastus medialis, এটা ভালো করে লক্ষ্য করো. It will be required in clinical anatomy. This is the vastus medialis. They are inserted into the margins of the patella. And vastus medialis insert in the medial margin of the patella more than the vastus lateralis. Vastus lateralis, if vastus lateralis insert in the lateral margin of patella for about 1 inch, vastus medialis insert into the medial margina at about 2 inches. More. জিনিসটা ক্লিয়ার হয়েছে? If it is a patella, it is the lateral side, it is the medial side. Vastus medialis as a tendon inserted and vastus lateralis inserted this one. Clear হয়েছে? So, in our every movements, there is a natural tendency of the patella to move laterally. সব সময় আমরা যখনই মুভমেন্ট করছি প্যাটেলা চাইবে ল্যাটারালি চলে যেতে. So there will be a dislocation of the lateral dislocation of the patella. But হচ্ছে কি আমাদের? হচ্ছে না. Why? There are 3 to 4 factors are there which keep the patella in position, and one of the important factor is that the more insertion of the vastus medialis in the medial side. Whenever patella tries dislocate, vastus medialis not dislocate. It is one of the factor. আসবো আমি. There are other factors, Q angle and other thing. Larger surface of the patella আসবো. So it is one of the factor that vastus is insert about 2/3 of the lateral margin of the patella and it about 1/3 of the lateral margin of the patella. So that prevents one of the factor. It is not all the factors. The patella. And this is now become tendinous, and within the tendon there is a bone, we call it patella. It is a sesamoid bone, which is got an anterior surface and a posterior surface. And posterior surface there are facets. About 7 facets are there. তোমাদের যারা প্যাটেলা পড়েছ, from this patella, it is known as the apex of the patella, this is the base of the patella. This quadriceps tendon become tendinosus, and from the apex of the patella, a tendon going to be inserted to the tibial tuberosity, and this tendon we call ligamentum patelli. So, it is the ligamentum patelli, this, from the apex to the tibial tuberosity, which is nothing but the extension of the quadriceps tendon. And patella is a bone which is found within the tendon of the quadriceps femoris. Iliotibial tract তোমরা জানো, it is a condensed deep fossa and inserted into the lateral condyle of the femur in the anterior aspect. And posteriorly, the hamstring muscles. This is the semitendinosus, semimembranosus. Semimembranosus is posteriorly, and semimembranosus inserted into a groove on the lateral upper part of the lateral medial condyle of the tibia. মনে পড়ছে কি টিবিয়া যা পড়েছো, টিবিয়ার যদি টিবিয়া এইখানে আর semimembranosus is inserted into here. Semimembranosus inserted হয়, এটা ইম্পর্টেন্ট আসবে, তার জন্যই বললাম। And another important muscle, very important muscle, is the popliteus. A knee joint without popliteus পড়া যায় না। Popliteus is known as the unlocking muscle of the unlock করে চাবিটাকে, তালাটাকে, knee joint. It is takes origin ফিমারের যে ল্যাটারাল কন্ডাইল রয়েছে, দিকে দেখি এইখানে একটা গ্রুভ রয়েছে, কেমন? And popliteus muscle takes origin from this group. ওই অরিজিন নিয়েছে, it comes posteriorly and spread and attached to the medial margin, medial line of the medial of the upper part of the tibia. So this is the popliteus muscle. খুব ভালো করে শোনো, আগেই বলেছি যে knee joint is divided by some fibrocartilaginous plate, two cartilaginous plate we call menisci. Lateral menisci in the lateral side, medial menisci in the medial side. While this popliteus coming to be inserted into the upper part and the tibia, some of the fibers, খুব ভালো করে শোনো এটা, some of the fibers of the muscular fibers of the popliteus getting inserted or getting attached to the posterior horn of the lateral condyle. Very, very important এটা, এটা যদি না হতো আমরা এক্সটেনশন থেকে ফ্লেকশন করতে পারতাম না। কি হলো, এই মেনিসকাসটা এরকম, এই মিডিয়াল এটা ফাব্রিকারের মিডিয়াল মেনিসকাস, আর এটা হচ্ছে ল্যাটারাল মেনিসকাস। Medial meniscus larger, semilunar in shape, and lateral meniscus is smaller, and more or less it forms the 3/4 of a circle. মানে গোল হয়েই যেত, একটুখানি বাকি রয়ে গেছে। এটা যদি এরকম হতো তাহলে it is become circular, কিন্তু তা নয়, it is look like that. So lateral meniscus is medial, it is the medial side, it is the lateral side. Medial meniscus is semilunar in shape. It has got a upper surface, lower surface, anterior horn and a posterior horn. And medial meniscus, a lateral meniscus is 3/4 of a circle. মানে সার্কেলের 4/3 ভাগ। And it has got a anterior horn and a posterior horn. In the posterior horn, one ligament, one muscle is attached. The muscle is known as the popliteus, few fibers of the popliteus, whole popliteus insertion করে ওখানে, few fibers of the popliteus, and a ligament known as the meniscofemoral ligament. Meniscofemoral ligament. So কিছু popliteus muscle এইখান দিয়ে যখন আসছে, এখান দিয়ে যখন নামছে, few fibers are attached to the posterior horn of the lateral meniscus of the knee joint. এটা মনে রাখবে, একদম ভুলবে না। So popliteus is very important. Now, with this introduction, we come to the articulating surfaces which form the knee joint. All of you know the articulating surfaces, it is formed by the 3 bones: condyles of the femur, condyles of the tibia, and posterior surface of the patella. These are the articulating surface. These are the condyles of the femur: medial condyle, lateral condyle of the femur, এই পুরোটা, it is a medial condyle, এটা medial condyle of tibia, lateral condyle of tibia, and also the posterior surface of the patella. And these are the articulating area. This articulating area is covered by articular hyaline type of articular cartilage. দেখতে পাচ্ছ? The bones is covered by a hyaline type of articular cartilage. And this is the meniscus. Lateral meniscus and a medial meniscus. Lateral meniscus and a medial meniscus. So what are the articulating surface? Condyles of the tibia, condyles of the femur, and the patella. Actually, there are 3 joints. A knee joint is composed of 3 joints. Medial femoropatellar joint, medial femorotibial joint, lateral femorotibial, medial tibiofemoral joint, lateral tibiofemoral joint, and patellofemoral joint. Medial and lateral tibiofemoral joint and patellar tibiofemoral joint in fetal life, actually there are 3 compartments, and they are all separated by a septum. এটা তোমাদের লেখার দরকার নেই, জানার দরকার নেই, but ultimately most of the septum disappears. মানে অ্যাকচুয়ালি যখন আর্লি স্টেজ ছিল 3টেই ছিল জয়েন্ট, মিডিয়াল সেপারেট জয়েন্ট ছিল, মিডিয়াল tibiofemoral, lateral tibiofemoral, and patellofemoral, and all are divided by a septum. একটা পার্টিশন দিয়েছিল, but gradually most of the septum disappears, only few parts of the septum remains in